itself numbered 2,000 pages in Latin. I doubt many have ever made the effort to read the whole thing. Nevertheless, his book became exceptionally popular. Well, maybe not the book itself, but the actual discovery. They started to print the Bibles on the island with a date and chronology according to Ussher. This theory of the young earth, and of young time, if you ask me, captivated the Christian world. It should be noted that even scientists like Kepler and Sir Isaac Newton estimated specific years for the divine act of creation that more or less coincided with that of Ussher. But still, the most mind-boggling thing for me is not the year and its relative recency, but the specific day. October 22nd, 4004 years before Christ, at 6 in the afternoon. On or around December 1910, human character changed. So wrote Virginia Woolf. And one can imagine that December 1910, ostensibly like all the others, gray, cold, smelling of fresh snow. But something had been unleashed, which only a few could sense. On September 1st, 1939, early in the morning, came the end of human time. 2. Years later, when many of his memories had already scattered like frightened pigeons, he could still go back to that morning when he was wandering aimlessly through the streets of Vienna, and a vagrant with a mustache like Garcia Marquez's was selling newspapers on the sidewalk in the early March sun. A wind blew up, and several of the newspapers swirled into the air. He tried to help, chasing down 2 or 3 and returning them. "You can keep one," said Marquez. Gaustine, that's what we'll call him, even though he himself used the name like an invisibility cloak, took the newspaper and handed the man a banknote, a rather large one for the occasion. The vagrant turned it over in his hand and muttered, "But I won't be able to make change." That sounded so absurd in the Vienna dawn that both of them burst out laughing. For the homeless, Gaustine felt love and dread. Those were the precise words, and always in that combination. He loved them and feared them in the way you love and fear something you've already been or expect to become. He knew that sooner or later he would join their ranks, to use a cliché. He imagined for a moment long lines of homeless people marching down Karntner and Graben. Yes, by blood he was one of them, albeit a slightly more peculiar case. A vagrant in time, if you will. Simply through a concurrence of circumstances, he had ended up with some money, enough to prevent his metaphysical adversity from turning into physical suffering. At that moment, he was practicing one of his professions, that of a geriatric psychiatrist. I suspect that he was secretly swiping his patients' stories so he could take shelter in them, to rest for a bit in someone's place and past. Otherwise, his head was such a jumble of times, voices, and places that he needed to either place himself immediately in the hands of his fellow psychiatrists, or he would do something that would force them to put him away themselves. Gaustine took the newspaper, walked a little way, and sat down on a bench. He was wearing a borsalino, a dark trench coat, beneath which the high collar of his turtleneck was visible, old leather boots, and he carried a leather bag in a nobly fading red. He looked like a man who had just arrived by train from some other decade. He could have passed for a discreet anarchist, an aging hippie, or a preacher from an obscure denomination. And so he sat down on the bench and read the name of the newspaper. Augustin, published by the homeless. Some of the paper was written by them, some by professional journalists. And there, on the second-to-last page, down in the left-hand corner, the most inconspicuous place in a newspaper, as all editors well know, was the article. His gaze fell upon it. A thin smile that held more bitterness than joy flitted across his face.